Click here to subscribe to our channel. Do not forget to press the bell icon to get regular updates of our free videos.
Good morning students. Today I have once again come to discuss about the specific strategy of the preparation of history. Earlier I have discussed with you how to prepare ancient history and how to prepare medieval history. In both the specific parts of history, I have given the emphasis over the knowledge of change. You have to, you can say, adopt a specific method of change. Now we are going to discuss with you about the modern history. This is quite interesting to go through modern history. And so far as the question of utility is concerned, it is equally important for the preparation of optional as well as that of general studies. Because even in general studies paper you will find at least 50% questions, the 50% part of the questions in history will be taken directly from modern and contemporary history. So whenever we are talking about the modern history, so that the contemporary history is well implied. You should understand this point. Now, one important thing I have to discuss with you first, then I have to go further. Questions are going to be more and more inferential. And if you are going to adopt the previous method in the preparation of the subject or the previous strategy to tackle the subject, in many questions you will find difficulty, and in exam hall it will be much difficult for you to tackle the questions. I can share with you certain questions, then the things would be more clear. You can go through the question paper of 2013. In one specific question you find that question on Dalhousie. Dalhousie was the, you can say, Dalhousie was the father of modernization in India, or Dalhousie laid the foundation of modernization in India. In this question, you can go through the question, you will realize, in fact, most of the students might have taken their specific stand on this question. They have concentrated over what were the specific contribution of Dalhousie in the modernization of India. And obviously, you can say they might have concentrated over the measures taken by Dalhousie, for example, the development of railways, that of telegraph lines, apart from that, the development of postal department, as well as the public works department, etc., etc. It means the modern transport and communication lines. But my students realize one thing: if you are going to emphasize simply the positive part of Dalhousie or positive contribution of Dalhousie, is it the correct answer of this question? Because Dalhousie is exclusively known for his policy of colonization in India. Means what you know as modernization, so this modernization was being carried under the umbrella of colonization. That's why a very reputed scholar, Bipin Chandra, has characterized this modernization as colonial modernization. Now, whenever I will just come to different questions, for example, some questions from post-independence era, even this year 2 questions from post-independence era, some questions from the history of freedom movement or history of national movement, some specific questions from colonialism, and one specific question this year you will realize and you will underline from the history of 18th century itself. So in most of the questions you cannot answer or you can say write the answer simply on the basis of the book's knowledge. As the questions are going to be more and more inferential in nature, you will not take data or information directly from the text or the book or even the notes and bring them into the answer sheet. That is not practically possible today. You can very well realize. Now I am coming to the topics. Earlier you may have adopted the specific method of reading history. That is the conventional method or traditional method. What is that method? Going from chapter to chapter. For example, you might have opened the book, then you have gone through the chapter, the Carnatic War. Specifically, the Battle of Plassey, that of Buxar. Then the policy of Warren Hastings. Then you can say the policy and reforms of Lord Cornwallis. Moving further, permanent settlement, Rayatwari, Mahalwali system, then the era of Dalhousie, and then you can move even on economic reforms, and finally on the Great Revolt of 1857. After that, you are moving toward the history of national movement, means the foundation of Indian National Congress onwards. In this sort of study, you may realize one thing: you are going through one chapter and the chapter is finished and you are moving to the other chapter. Then you are once again, after finishing the chapter, you are moving to the next chapter, and in the end of your preparation, you will realize that almost everything has been evaporated from your mind, and now your mind has turned to be blank. You are recalling the things, you are not recalling them. I am giving you the very specific method. You can characterize it the thinking out of the box pattern. For the sake of the convenience, you have to divide modern history in 4 segments, 4 parts. The first part or the first segment is the history of 18th century. The second one segment is the history of colonialism. The third one segment is the history of nationalism, and the fourth one, the contemporary history or the history of post-independence era. So that is the fourth one segment of this part of the syllabus. What should be our specific method for the preparation in the specific part? So I have to discuss with you. Just observe here. Here you can see the history of 18th century. That is the first part of the question, first part of the syllabus. And if you are going through the history of 18th century, better to divide the history of 18th century in 2 subparts. The first subpart is the first half of 18th century, and the second one subpart is you can say the second one part of the 18th century. In first one part, what is the specificity of this period? The specificity of this period is disintegration of Mughal Empire and the foundation of regional states. If you are observing the syllabus in toto, then you will realize your syllabus starts from the mid 18th century, which means the second half of 18th century. Your syllabus starts from the second half of 18th century, and according to the wording of your syllabus, that is starting from the second half of 18th century till the mid 20th century. So that is the wording of your syllabus, or you can say till present era, not the mid 20th century. So this is the, you can say, size of your syllabus. So if you are going to follow the syllabus, then we should start from the second half of 18th century, means from 1857 onwards. But this year you will realize one question, you will underline one question, and that is from the history of 18th century and the first half of 18th century. This question concentrated over the fragmented polity of India. Fragmented polity means what was the political scenario of India in 18th century after the decline of Mughal Empire. Here you can say, in order to you can say perform efficiently, go through the first half of 18th century as well. In the first part of 18th century, 3 and 4 specific points should be emphasized. The first specific point is what was the political scenario of India after the disintegration of Mughal Empire. Then the second one, you can say, important issue, and the second one issue is that after the disintegration of Mughal Empire, was there any Indian state which was in a position to replace the Mughal Empire as a whole? So definitely your attention would be drawn towards Marathas. Marathas could have given the replacement to the Mughal Empire, but it did not become the case. Then 1 and 2 aspects should be dealt with from the perspective of historiography, and 1 and 2 aspect is whether the disintegration of Mughal Empire represented the dark era in Indian history, whether was it an age of decline. So this was the, you can say, issue of historiography in first half of 18th century. How should be the decline of Mughal Empire treated by their scholars, either as the era of decline or with an era of new potentialities. So this is the matter of discussion, and from the perspective of historiography, this point should be discussed. Then after doing or finishing the topic of the first half of 18th century, you can safely move toward the second half. In the second half, you can say what is the issue. Normally in the second half, you will observe this second half is associated with the rise of British rule in India. Means that the first half is associated with the disintegration of Mughal Empire, and the second half the rise of British rule in India. Here the specific points should be discussed here. The first one, foundation and the experimentation of foundation and the expansion of the British rule in India. That is the first one important aspect. Second one, why was the British company converted from a mercantile company to a political power? So that is the specific issue for you to know. A company which you might have heard a very well-known proverb कि आए थे हरिभजन को ओटन लगे कपास. The company came for doing the trade, but company started to build the state. Emerged to be a political power. What was the reason behind that? Why did a mercantile company move towards gaining political power in India? What was the background? What was the objective behind that? So that is the specific point. Then why did the British company get success against French? So here you can move toward the Carnatic War and try to measure the reasons behind the British success against the French company. Then the next one subtopic is why did Indian states not resist the British onslaught in India, including Marathas? Why Indian states could not, you can say, resist the British rule in India, you can say the British conquest in India. So this aspect should be discussed. And next one issue is, did the British conquer India in a fit of absent-mindedness? Means after the Carnatic War, the Battle of Plassey, etc., from the perspective of historiography, the important issue is whether British conquered India in a fit of absent-mindedness or the British was having a well thought out plan before conquering India. Because the British historians are just trying to, you can say, deny this fact. Company was having any specific objective or company was having any specific plan to conquer India. Obviously, you can say from the perspective of historiography or Indian perspective, you have to deny this view. And the last one, did the British work as a redeemer of India? Means redeemer, Muktidata. Did the British work as a Muktidata of India, redeemer of India? So we cannot accept this, you can say, thesis. How we are going to accept, and how can we accept that British just work as the redeemer of India? They came to India with a colonial purpose, and they were having their own purpose to rule in India. If India was benefited slightly from the British rule, so it was the unintended impact of the British rule, not the intended impact of the British rule. Here you can say very interesting thing. It is true, in association with the British company, India underwent a phase of modernization as well, although partial, but modernization as well. Now the British is seeking credit for that, and we are denying this credit to the British. It is very natural, because our argument is we were not having the specific plan to modernize India, and India was not modernized willingly. Rather, you can say it was the unintended impact of the British rule. Means that British did not try to modernize India. It was the byproduct of the colonial policy. India benefited on this ground, and certain process of modernization might have, you can say, progressed in India. So it is here we are not going to give this credit to the British company. So up to this topic, the 18th century will be finished. That is the, you can say, a smallest part of the whole of our syllabus. Then we are moving to the second one segment, and that is the history of colonialism. And this history of colonialism is definitely having a very interesting part. Now we can move to this diagram. Colonialism. So we are going to discuss colonialism. So first we need to know the definition of colonialism. What is the definition of colonialism? If you have to define colonialism, so that is the main mantra. Just the mantra, you have to digest this mantra. Colonialism is basically an economic relation, but it was going to affect the political, social and cultural structure as well. Here the point is, or in other words, and if you have to enlarge the meaning is that British came to India in order to carry the economic exploitation, and it was in course of economic exploitation, it was compelled to adopt certain political policy, certain social policies, certain cultural policy. So it means that the political policy, social policy and cultural policy are not the independent from the economic policy. So that's why colonialism is basically an economic relation. Now, as Rajni Pamdat an Indian Marxist scholar, has made a study of colonialism in 3 different stages. Earlier, Marx had divided it in 2 phases simply. That is, you can say, monopoly phase of colonialism, and the second one was the free trade. But this Rajni Pamdat, while getting inspiration from Lenin as well, another Marxist thinker, then he just divided it in 3 phases. The first phase, mercantilist phase, the second phase, industrial phase, and the third, financial phase. So better you have to divide it in 3 phases, and then you have to, you are supposed to have the specific, you can say, view over what was the economic interest in particular phase, and how did this economic interest you can say give direction to the political policy, the social policy, and the cultural policy. So that is mercantilist phase. So firstly try to find out objective, what was the objective of the British company during this mercantilist phase. You will come to realize that the objective was to maximize the rate of revenue so that a substantial amount could be invested in trade and commerce. What is the story behind that? When British company came to India, so it came just as a mercantile company. Indian products were in heavy demand in West, but the situation was not vice versa. Means in Western nations, Indian products were in demand, but no Western product or Western goods were in demand in India in return. The problem with the British company was that the British company were just, you can say, exporting various products from India to Europe, but no European product was in demand in India. So company was compelled to bring the precious metal in the form of gold and silver to finance Indian trade. And as this was the era of mercantilism in Europe, so the British government was putting a point of objection to the behavior of the company, why the company is draining out the precious metal from Britain to India. So right from the very beginning, company was searching for some sort of alternative on whose basis it could have financed the trade in India. So finally you can say company got an opportunity after the Battle of Plassey and Buxar, because after the Battle of Buxar, on the basis of the Treaty of Allahabad, the company got the Diwani of Bengal from Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II. So now company became the Diwan, so company started to collect the revenue from Bengal, and then the company continuously utilized a part of this revenue in order to finance Indian trade. So it created a very unique situation. Unique situation means that earlier the company was exporting some products from India to Britain or Europe, and in return the company was bringing the precious metal. But now a part of the collected revenue was utilized in the purchasing of Indian products. So even the products belong to India, and money belonged to India. So India did not get anything substantial in return of the products it was exporting to Europe or Britain. So this created a very unique phenomenon of the drain of wealth, and it is from here you will find the origin of drain of wealth. But that is another issue. Here the main point is, what was the motive of the company now? A motive of the company now is to maximize the revenue in India. Maximize the revenue in India, because if the revenue collection in India had to be maximized, so a substantial part of revenue could have been invested in trade and commerce. So the motto of the company was to maximize the collection of revenue and to preserve the collection, to shed off the extravagance, try to save as much money as possible so that a substantial part might have been invested in trade and commerce. My students, it was a specific economic objective, and this objective you will find here the shadow of this policy on all policies of the British company during this phase, on political policy, on administrative policy, on social policy, on cultural policy, etc. etc. I can give you the example. In political policy, the political policy of the company during this phase was that the policy of ring fence or to encircle the enemy states with friendly states. What I have told you. In fact, if the objective of the company was to preserve the money and resources so that a substantial part of the resources could be invested in trade and commerce, so the company had to spend less. So even company was not ready to show any sort of extravagance on military expenditure as well. Company was inclined to do the limited or spend the limited quantity of money even on military matters. So if the money had to be preserved in order to invest in trade, So the company tried to set off its responsibility in the battlefield. Means the company should not have, you can say, invested too much money even in war and military expenditure. So that's why during this period the company followed the policy of ring fence. Ring fence, the British should develop a group of friendly states in order to encircle the enemy states, and it is through the resources of Indian states themselves that the company could have formed a very strong army. So what you know as the Wellesley's the policy, that was the part of the policy of ring fence. You might have heard about the policy subsidiary alliance. So what was the objective of subsidiary alliance? To create a strong British army at the cost of, at the expenditure of Indian states. So it was the part of the same policy to preserve the money. And likewise in administrative field, you can say during second half of 18th century, hardly will you find that British were inclined to bring any major or radical change in administrative structure. You will be surprised to know that during the second half of 18th century, the old Mughal structure of administration was preserved by the British company with certain modifications. We cannot say that there was no modification, but very limited modification. So company was mainly interested either in land revenue reforms, because objective was to maximize the land revenue, or you can say judicial reforms, because judicial reforms were the part of the reforms of land revenue. Because without bringing the reforms in civil justice, even the reforms in land revenue system was not possible. So during this phase you will find if reforms were carried on, so either in land revenue system or in judicial system, otherwise the old traditional structure was being maintained. So this was the impact, this was the specific administrative policy, and it is bearing the impact of this objective to preserve the money, because to bring more reforms meant to take more responsibility, and to take more responsibility meant to do more expenditure. So this was the case. Now, as the economic policy I have simply mentioned, because the origin of drain of wealth started from there. Likewise, after the conquest of Bengal, the British company continuously exploited the mercantile, the artisans class in Bengal, as the British company used to have the control over them with the support of its brokers. So in this way you can say this was the economic policy. In social policy, once again you can link the social policy to the economic objective. Actually the company had not to increase the expenditure, and company was not ready to take any major responsibility in this regard. So here, what was the objective of the company here? Objective of the company was to maintain the traditional structure in society, traditional structure, and did not bring any specific change. Because if the company would have carried reforms in society, it means it might have increased its responsibility in India. More responsibility, more expenditure, that was the first one. Second one point, it was not beneficial for the company, because the objective of the company in India was limited. Limited means to maximize the revenue and to invest in trade and commerce. So there was no use of bringing reforms in society. And you know if the British was enthusiastically bringing some reforms in society, so it might have invited the backlash from Indian side, means the Indians might have reacted to the situation of intervention into the social matters. So that's why company here, you can say, maintained the distance from the social reforms. Even Sati was being burnt alive, but company was not doing nothing to stop it. And the last one was Orientalism. Orientalism was the specific cultural policy of British towards India. Orientalism was having interest into the study of Indian past and culture, and it continuously praised Indian past and culture and tried to prove that Indian culture was definitely superior, ancient Indian culture was definitely, or you can say Oriental culture was definitely superior to Western culture as well. Means or at least if Oriental culture is not superior, to at least not inferior to the Western culture. And in this way, a lot of British scholars from William Jones to Cunningham all did the uncritical praise to Indian past and culture. And it was due to this fact that British were not having, one of the reasons, British were not having the motive to bring reforms in India. And if they were not having the objective to bring reforms in India, so better you can say Orientalism suited to their colonial interest as well. Because you know, what was the demand of Orientalism at that time? The demand of Orientalism was to maintain the traditional structure. And to maintain the traditional structure, Indians should be ruled from their own perspective, according to its their own tradition and customs. So in one sense you can say Orientalism favored traditionalism in India. So that's why you can say the basic objective is the economic, but this objective has, you can say, influenced the course of action in political field, in administrative field, in social field, in cultural field, etc. So now my students, you will not go through chapter to chapter, rather you will try to link all the chapters from the single one phenomena. So here you have to be a bit critical while making a study, then you will never forget this method of, you will never forget the either you can say information or interpretations if you are going to follow this pattern of a study. Now you have finished the first phase. What is the time period for the first phase? Between 1752 to 1813. Now you can very well move towards the second one phase. During the second one phase, that is known as industrial phase. So you can move towards industrial phase. Now you can say objective has obviously changed, because you know in 1813 you will observe here that there was the introduction of the Charter Act of 1813. What was the basis of the Charter Act? Actually, up to the beginning of 19th century in Britain, there was the rise of a capitalist class or industrialist class. So East India Company was representing the interest of the mercantile class, but now there was the rise of a capitalist class or industrialist class. So this class was a dominant class, and now this class put a point of objection to the British policy towards the Indian company or the British East India Company. In fact, earlier the whole market of British East India Company was placed under the monopoly of the East India Company. This newly you can say emerged group, that is industrial capitalist class, so that put a point of objection and placed before the British Parliament a demand better to abolish the trade monopoly of East India Company in India, so that the Indian market should have been kept open for the British manufactured goods. Definitely it was a dominant class, so under its influence the Charter Act of 1813 was introduced, on whose basis the Indian market was kept open for the British manufactured products and the trade monopoly of East India Company was simply abolished. So objective has totally changed now, you can say, to convert India as a market for British manufactured goods and the supplier of raw materials. Now India had to develop as the market for manufactured goods and supplier of raw materials. So once again you will realize all the policies you will find the major restructuring in political policy, administrative policy, social policy and cultural policy. In political policy, you can say to bring more and more Indian states under direct control through annexation. Means during the first phase, you can say the British company tried to avoid annexation and war as much as possible. Although the British company had to fight the war, carry the annexation, but under compulsion. During this phase, the company was willing to fight the war and do the annexation. As India had to develop the market for British manufactured goods, so more and more regions should have been brought under the direct control of the British company. So this was the, you can say, a specific policy. You will realize here Lord Hastings in 1813 to 23. So Lord Hastings, after that Lord Amherst, then William Bentinck, then Auckland, then Ellenborough, then Hardinge and Dalhousie, all were the imperialist rulers, and they tried to do the uncritical, unlimited and unrestricted expansion in India, so that India should be developed as a market for British manufactured goods. You will observe the question paper of 2008 UPSC. You will directly find a question from this one part, and whosoever is conceptually clear, he can very well and very easily just answer this question. Then the second, you find administrative policy. What is the specific feature to bring substantial changes in administrative structure? If India had to develop as a market for British manufactured goods, so India had to, so obviously you can say Indian administrative structure had undergo a metamorphosis. Then comes the turn commercialization of agriculture, deindustrialization, development of railways, telegraph and drain of wealth. All are the byproduct of this objective. India had to develop as a market for British manufactured goods. Then we were just observing social reform through legislation and promotion of English education. Up here also you will find that is the social policy. It was the byproduct of this objective. If India had not to develop as, if Indians are not taught the English education, or Indians should not have adopted the English education, then how could a group of consumers emerge in India? It was believed that in fact if the Macaulay system of education would be introduced, then there would be the rise of a group of Indians which would, or a generation of Indians which would be simply Indian in blood and complexion, but British or Westerners in taste, temperament and morality, and it was this class which would work as a market for British manufactured goods. So directly linked to this policy. Then why social reforms? Why did the company initiate the social reform during this phase, while the company the same you can say same plan in the previous period? It was due to the fact the company realized, or you can say the British scholars realized, if India would not be brought from its traditional mold, India could not have adopted the English education, and then India could not move towards move to develop a market for the manufactured goods. So it was directly linked to this policy. Then cultural policy, liberalism and utilitarianism. Earlier you have observed Orientalism, but vis-a-vis Orientalism you can observe here liberalism and utilitarianism. So this policy advocated the greater change in India, reforms and change. Either it would be the Lord Macaulay or James, or you can say Bentham or James Mill, all advocated for reforms, carrying reforms in India. Why? Because if India would not be brought from the traditional mold, how could India develop as a market for British manufactured goods? What was the emphasis of liberalism and utilitarianism, and in what way they were different from Orientalism? So it is here that will be clear, even it is directly linked to this sort of objective. So in this way you will reach up to 1856. You are moving from chapter to chapter, but you have reshuffled the chapter according to this specific method. Then you will just enjoy going through colonialism, and the third one phase you will just switch, and on the basis of the same formula you can even observe the third one phase, and then your second one part will be finished. Third one phase, up here you will underline the two important objectives. One objective was to open India for British capital investment, and the second one point is to avert the situation of the Great Revolt of 1857. And these two objectives are going to influence the all British policy towards India. Political policy, British Crown preferred the policy of indirect expansion in place of direct one. How did the British Crown change its policy towards Indian states after 1858? So this is the matter of interest for you. Queen Victoria gave promise to Indian princes and kings, whatever agreements and contracts were signed between the Indian states as well as the British company, these contracts as well as agreements would be definitely preserved by the British Crown as well. And the British Crown promised you have not to make the further expansion in India. So it appears that the British Crown has now completely underwent a change of heart, but it was not the case. Simply, it modified its policy of expansion. Earlier it was emphasizing over the direct expansion, but now it emphasized on the indirect expansion, because taking lesson from the Great Revolt of 1857, it became crystal clear in this revolt, or this Great Revolt became severe in the region which were under the direct control. So now the policy of direct control was simply discarded. Practically Indian kings lost their power. Their actual situation was just like the feudatories, means the feudal lords before the Queen Victoria. So this was the case. Likewise in administrative field, to bring administrative reforms in the manner that government's grip over India could be strengthened without antagonizing the people. Here also the lesson was being taken from the Great Revolt of 1857. Then you can say at the economic policy, transfer of home charges from India to Britain, drain of wealth, rise of modern industries. Here the point is, if India had to develop as the destination for capital investment, so there was the larger influx of capital from Britain to India after 1858, and India had to return the capital in the form of a part of principal money as well as the interest. So you can say a fixed amount from India to Britain was being regularly transferred in the form of home charges. So there was the, you can say, influx of money from finance from Britain to India, and then this money returned with the extra charge, means with interest, to Britain. So that was known as the home charges. And then you are just observing social policy to follow the policy of non-intervention in social matters. Now the company has taken the lesson, the British Crown has taken the lesson from the Great Revolt of 1857. So the policy of intervention into the matter of Indian society and culture, that was discarded, because it was bitterly felt that the Indians rose in revolt in course of the Great Revolt of 1857 in order to preserve their deen and dharam. So now the company was a bit, you can say, panicky. In future, if you are going to intervene into the matter of our socio-cultural matter of India, so once again Indians could have reacted. So this was the policy, and to promote the racial division first, then you can say communal division. So even you know, cultural policy was to create the racial division between British and Indians first, and then you can say the policy of divide and rule was followed between Hindus and Muslims. So that is the part of the same objective, you can say. In this way, up to this period, you will find the two important parts of modern history would be finished, and if you are going to follow this formula, you will never forget either the analysis or the information. And furthermore, the subject would be much interesting for you, either you are going through the perspective of optional paper or general studies paper. So that is, I think, beneficial for you, and I hope you will try to modify your old method of study. My students, thank you very much. In the next one lecture, I have to discuss about the second part. Next one lecture, I have to discuss the second part. Second part means the part of nationalism, means the third. Second part means it consisted of the two important segments. The one segment is the history of national movement, and the last one is the post-independence era. Thank you very much. I will see you later. Okay.